Hello and welcome to Ankomat Online Academy. In today's lesson, we want to talk about statistics. Statistics. And we are going to be reviewing the following concepts in statistics. We are going to be learning the meaning of data, data presentation, frequency table, grouped data, ungrouped data, class interval, class limits, class boundary, class mark, cumulative frequency table, bar charts, pie charts, frequency polygon, histogram, and central tendency. So let's start with data. When you decide to count the number of a car that will pass through a road in a given time interval, let's say 20 minutes, you want to be recording the models of each car that will pass within the time limit. What you are doing is statistics, and the information you are gathering is what we call data. The first car passes, maybe Toyota, you record it. Another one passes, maybe Honda, you record it. Another one passes, maybe Mercedes-Benz, you record it. What you are recording or the information you are gathering is what we call data. So data, they are numerical facts or information which you will later process to give you more details or other information that you want. So when you gather the number of cars passing, maybe you want to know the cars that the model of cars that passes most, or you want to use the data to perform other things. So the data is actually what you gather or the information you gather that you have to process in order to use it and do some other things. So that is the meaning of data. And data presentation talks about the way we present or the way we show the data we gather. Sometimes, or when you were in primary school, you were taught how to represent data with pictograms, that is pictures. Maybe when you see a Honda pass, you may use an orange or a circle to represent it. Honda, you use a circle. You may decide to use circle. And then when you see Toyota, you may decide to use rectangle. And other brands, you can use different shapes to represent them. Then different shapes that you use to represent different objects is what we call, or using shapes to represent an object is what we call a pictogram. So that is one way of presenting a data or showing a data. You can also show a data using bars in what we call bar charts. You draw a graph and use bars to show the height or the level of each of the data you have collected. You can also use pie chart in which you use a circle. You have a circle, and in each of the circles, you have a sector. That is a portion of the circle, which we call a sector. You use it to represent each of the data you collected. So each of the sectors will be determined by the angle it takes. So maybe this one is 20 degrees, this one is 30 degrees, this one 40 degrees, this one's 80 degrees. So you determine the angles that each of the sectors will take. And once somebody sees it and see that this one is looking bigger, the person already knows that the data there is bigger than the ones that are looking smaller or smaller sectors. So we have different ways. We also have histogram, which also looks like a graph, which is also a graph, a form of graph that we also use to represent or to present data. So that is what we call data presentation. Now, grouped data. Let me talk about ungrouped data first before I talk about group data. If you are measuring or you are analyzing, maybe you are counting or you are checking the weights of people in a class. Maybe you have some people weighing 1 kg, some other people 2 kg, some other people 3 kg, some other people 4 kg. So you may even get to 100 kg. Now, presenting this data, maybe you have a name, Ikechukwu, or let me say, Ikechukwu, or Michael. You have Michael. Maybe Michael weighs 1 kg. Then maybe Hassan. Maybe Hassan weighs 2 kg. So listing all the students and their weights is what we call ungrouped data in this form, where each person has his own weights, or each person or each of the objects goes with its own frequency. This value that represents the number or the weight of the student is called the frequency. Now this is the data. So this is what we call ungrouped data, where each of the data has a single frequency that goes with it. Now, in grouped data, you may decide to say that representing these students, there are up to 100 students in the class, and their weights vary. So you may decide to group the students and say, or to group the weights and say, let me group weights from 1 to 4 together, 1 to 4, 5 to 8, or 5 to 9. So you group it together, that any weight that lies between this number, then we check the number of students that are within that range. Remember, in ungrouped data, In ungroup data, what you do is that, let me say this is the number of students. Number of students for ungroup data, you can say maybe when the weight is 1, you check number of students that have weight of 1 kg. Maybe it is only one person, maybe only Michael, you say 1. Then maybe the weight 4 kg, maybe there are 5 people or 3 people that are weighing 4 kg. But in grouped data, you will say that for me to list all these students one by one like this, it will be difficult for me. So let me group the students and say, or let me group the weights and say students that weigh from 1 to 4. So let me group them together. And that means that this 1, which weighs 1 kg, and 3, which weighs 4 kg, they are all within the range of 1 to 4. So you put all the weights, all the people that have weights between 1 to 4 kg together. That is what we call grouped data. You may have 5 to 8, and then 9 to 13, and etc. Now, class interval. When you group a data, like this one we have 1 to 4, that is what we call class interval. The number of groups that you have in your presentation is what we call class interval. You may decide to group the whole class into 7 or into 5 groups. People that weigh between 1 to 4, people that weigh between, or 1 to 10, people that weigh between, if there are 100 people in the class, you may decide to group them into 5. People that weigh between 1 to 20, 21 to 40, 41 to 50, 41 to 60, 61 to 80, 81 to 100. So you may group it that way into 5 different groups, and that is what we call class interval. Now, the class interval has 2 components. We have lower class interval and upper class interval. Like this one that is 1 to 4. The first one is called lower class interval, and the second one is called the upper class interval. Now, class limits. Now, class limits are the limits or the ends in the class interval. Remember that if you group 1 to 4, that means that 1, 2, 3, and 4, they are all part of the group. Now, the class limits is the ends of the class interval. For this one, 1 and 4 is the class limits. 1 and 4, they are the class limits. So they represent the lower class limits and the upper class limit. That is the 2 components of the class interval. The lower class limits and the upper class limits. Not lower class interval. Lower class limit and upper class limits, they are the components of the class interval. Now, class boundary. The class boundary is talking about when you remove, or the smallest number that you approximate to get the class, and the highest number that you approximate to leave the class is called the class boundary. The lowest number that you approximate to get the class, to get to the class interval, and the highest number you will approximate to leave the class interval is what we call class boundary. Now, like 1 to 4, if you have 1 to 4, The lowest number you can approximate to get to this class interval is the number you approximate to get to the lower class limit. The lower class limit here is 1. So what is the lowest thing or the smallest thing you can approximate to get to 1? 0.5. If you approximate 0.5, we take it to be 1. So 0.1 is the lower class boundary for this. That is the smallest thing, the smallest number you approximate to get 1. You get to the class interval. Now, the smallest number that you will approximate to leave the class, the highest number is 4. So what can you approximate to leave for? 4.5. Anything 4.1, you can still take it as 4. 4.2, you can still take it as 4. 4.3, you can still take it as 4. 4.4, you can still take it as 4. But 4.5, you can approximate it to mean 5. So 5 is no longer within this class interval. So it is out of it. So that is the smallest thing you will approximate to leave the class interval. That is the class boundary. Now, class mark. Class mark is gotten when you add the lower class limits and upper class limits. When you add two of them together, it will give you the class mark. So when you add 1 plus 5, 1 plus 4, which is 5, 5 divided by 2, that will give you the class boundary, the class mark. When you add the lower class limit and upper class limit and you divide the sum by 2, you get the class mark. Then cumulative frequency table. Cumulative frequency means the frequency or the number of occurrence of a class interval plus the frequency of the one that is coming before it. Now, assuming we have a table of, we have 1 to 10 and the frequency of it is 2. We have 11 to 20 and the frequency of it is 4. And we have 21 to 30 and the frequency of it is 6. Now, the cumulative frequency for the first one, there's nothing coming before it. So the frequency of it, the cumulative frequency of it is cumulative frequency CF. The frequency of any of the interval plus the frequency of the one that is coming before it. So for the first one, there's nothing coming before it, so we take the cumulative frequency as the frequency of the first interval, which is 2. Now for the second one, which is 11 to 20, the frequency of 11 to 20 is 4. The frequency of the one that is coming before 11 to 20 is 1 to 10, which is 2. The frequency of it is 2. So when we add 2 of them, 4 plus 2 will give us 6. That is the frequency of 11 to, the cumulative frequency of the interval 11 to 20. That is 2 plus 4. Now for 21 to 30, the cumulative frequency is the frequencies of the ones that are coming before it, which is 2 plus 4 plus now the 6 plus the frequency of the particular interval. 2 plus 4 is 6. 6 plus 6 is 12. So the cumulative frequency is 12. Now, the bar chart, I've described the meaning of bar charts, and pie charts. I also describe it using circular representation or sectors of a circle to represent the data. Then frequency polygon is a kind of graph, and the histogram is also another form of graph. And then central tendency is where we check mean, mode, and media. So these are what we are going to discuss in another class. Now, in your assignment, or let me solve one example. If we are given this data, if we are given this data 1 to 10, if you have this data and we may be asked to find the class interval. The class interval for this group is 4 because the group is grouped into 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that is the class interval if we are asked to find the class interval for this group. Now, if you are asked to find the class limits of the first interval, the limits of the first interval is 1, and here is 10. The lower class limit is 1, and the upper class limit is 10. If you are asked to find the class boundary, of course you know how to do it. The first one is the lowest thing you can do to get to 1, which is 0.5. Assuming it is 2. Assuming this one is 2 now, the lowest thing you can get to is 1.5. If you approximate it, you get 2. So, and the highest number you can get to leave the class, this is 10. The upper limit is 10. So if you say 10.5, you approximate it to 11. So 11 is no longer within the interval, so it is leaving the class. So this is how to get the class boundaries. And if you're asked to get the class mark, you add the lower class limit and upper class limit, and then you divide it by 2. Then if you're asked to get the frequencies, maybe they have frequencies of this one: 1, 4, 7, 8. Of course, you know the first one is always the frequency of it because there's nothing coming before it, which is 1. Then the second one is 1 and 4, which is 5. Then the third one, you add this 3, 1 plus 4 plus 7, and 8. And the last one, 1 plus 4 plus 7 plus 8. Then you get the cumulative frequencies. So with this, I've come to the end of the lesson. Now your assignment. Okay, so you use this class intervals and then the frequency, and then you show the following data for each of them. Show the class limits, the class boundaries, the class mark, and cumulative frequency. Thank you.